So, hello. I'm going now to begin an investigation into an idea that I have been considering for quite a long time, and this is an idea which I call the super system. And in these investigations, I will try to clarify different aspects of it in the search of a more coherent model, which at the moment I don't feel that I'm quite in possession of that yet, and this is the reason why I call this series investigations, in order to map out some of the ingredients, so to say, before at some point coming to the possibility of a more simple description of what the super system is. So we could think of this as a situational super system for the organization of real life events on the surface of planet Earth. And that the purpose of the super system is that the general existence on planet Earth should work as well as possible. This includes the cooperation and coordination of human beings and activities, and the subsystems and kinds of tasks that are carried out, including how we use machinery, how language is happening, what kind of communication games are being played, and the types of perspectives being utilized, and in general, more than everything, the complete process within which all of this is taking place. At some point, there might become activities organized around actually harmonized common interests between people, and being engaged in mutually beneficent interactions which support positive long-term relationships. Reaching a scenario at some point where the position of each person in the scenario is a position where they are engaged in an activity which they consider to be maximally meaningful and rewarding, and where they also manage in those conditions to produce an output, so to say, which is also beneficial for everyone else around them. And here I define this as an all-win scenario. The scenario where all people are engaged in a kind of an activity which, all things considered, works as well as possible. The super system is that larger entity within which this scenario is happening and which assists this scenario and helps arrange the conditions for this kind of a scenario. So in that sense, the super system can be considered as an intelligence network of the commons. Something which can become a science of the commons and a science of the good life for the commons. A science which is situational and fundamentally cross-disciplinary, and always it acts in real time at the moment now. In one possible future, then, we will begin building some version of the super system between all the beings on the planet. And we might also say that this super system is an extension or a continuation of the super system which is already present beforehand, which we might call nature or the ecosystem or civilization or culture or some kind of unit which has within it all of those things. More specifically, we begin to build a situational super system for the organization of real life events and organize those events around the corresponding interests and values of the people involved in the events, with a supremely efficient usage of resources within the scenario. Included in this is an ability to monitor real life facts and adapt the various circumstances of local conditions and specific individuals and the people as they are, with their interests and wishes as they are at those moments, into a coordinated action out of which beautiful things are created. There is a built-in capacity to learn through trials and observations and testings of brilliant ideas at local places. One can use the best of artificial intelligence and human intelligence and knowledge in general and scientific methods and technologies for evolving knowledge over time, which is a kind of knowledge which is primarily in assistance to the good life of the entire planetary action space. The ethos which underlies the supersystem is an ethos of unconditional love of reality, including all the living beings of the planet. How can we understand the all-win principle? The all-win principle can be seen as one of the guidelines for the operational procedures of the supersystem as we begin carrying it out from wherever we are. And it means that the long-term life scenario of every person without exception in the long run is moving towards a scenario which that person themselves consider to be a really great scenario, and where that person continues to experience it as a really great scenario for themselves over a longer period of time, and where that person even considers the scenario to be, generally speaking, a good scenario, even considering the ethical implications, one might say. This is where we can find a clear definition of what an all-win scenario is. An all-win scenario is an all-win scenario at the moment when 100% of the participants agree that it is an all-win scenario. And when this happens, then we will know that we are on to something. Making this a little more specific, this kind of a scenario will involve taking care of the primary needs of the person at an acceptable degree, the existence in a supportive and friendly and loving social environment, and an action where the activity of the person is such an activity that they themselves consider it to be highly meaningful and fun and rewarding and worthwhile. Part of an interaction which works well for them and the rest. Under those beneficial real-life conditions, it is natural to examine questions of the basic existential kinds, such as what is currently happening, what could happen in the future, and how can we move this in the best direction. Moving now to a slightly different observation point, I'm going to look into the first of those questions, which was what is currently happening. And the first clear insight in regards to that question is that currently very much is happening. It's very much that we could consider good, much we might consider bad, and also an infinite number of variations in between. We also notice that there is continuous change inside of us and outside of us, as one concurrent stream of life, which each of us alone is, and we're also in an environment that's transforming at every moment, and where all the action is always unfolding dynamically in all directions at once. This is sometimes described as complexity, and the point being made that we are living in a state of complexity. And when trying to take in the totality of that complexity, we will often find ourselves in a state of perplexity. And at the same time, we generally never take in the totality of everything happening. We don't know the totality of everything that's happening, and we use all kinds of simplifications in order to be able to navigate the state of affairs in a reasonable way. This leads to the question, how can we act well within a dynamically flowing situation? And here is another interesting observation about the situation in general. We notice we are influenced by the environment while we are also influencing the environment in a mutually communicative feedback loop of influence. There is always an influence going both ways. We are influencing outwards, and outward world is influencing against us inwards. And it is moving like breathing, always mutually interacting and always reaching some kind of compromise. And each one of us as an organism is like that as well. Each cell in the body also has it like this. And each smaller thing within the cell also has it like this. There's an influence which is moving outwards and inwards, and outwards and inwards, and outwards and inwards. And always these influences are meeting. And this is happening on all levels of existence. An influence between the inner and outer scales and dimensions of every single part of space. So wherever anything is happening, it is happening in the sense of an influence between inner and outer worlds moving in both directions simultaneously and meeting at every point. And that is an astonishing insight. How are these influences interacting? Well, at every moment, there's experience. A part of the experience of being a human being is to breathe all the time and having a heart which is beating and flowing blood around the body, and various signals sending between one area and another, and many of them happen so fast that we don't even notice it. And other things are moving slowly, too slow for us to notice it. Like, for example, certain changes that take place over decades. And we notice that it is one scenario where events are happening fast and happening slowly and happening at multiple speeds in between. And that the end result is always how all of these different processes are working together. Within this magnitude of life, there is also the experience of thinking, feeling something, seeing colors and shapes and movements around in the horizon. We can notice waves which hit the skin and sounds and hairs moving on the surface, the body being in contact with clothes, and continuous movement of the body in the room every moment of every day through existence. And there's always some kind of movement inside me and inside of you and inside of all the others, and then around about and between. And always these movements are interacting also between the people. And each person exists at the center of it all. There are many centers of it all, and each single part of the person is a center in itself, and each unit of everything which exists in this space is a center of it all. Every place in space is the center of infinity, because it does also seem to be infinitely large. The scope of all this life. The life within which this super system is perhaps already existing and perhaps wants to be created. And maybe it is the super system itself that we are talking about all the time, but that it can also, like the rest, appear on different scales. So this does seem to be the situation that I have to deal with, that everyone has to deal with, and which we are already dealing with and have always been dealing with. A situation where there truly is a magnitude of life in all directions which are interacting in ways which nobody can see the fullness of, because it is too much. And again, this is a very well-known phenomenon that we are well used to. So we might as well just deal with it as best we can. So what would be the best way to deal with this magnitude of life? It's a natural question to ask in regards to this vision of the super system. And this may lead to another question, which is the question of why do I care? So my answer at the moment is something along the lines of that the reason I care is because when looking at this existence in total and seeing that it is for sure happening, and also seeing the magnitude of all that is happening, that gives rise to an impression for me that this total reality is inherently spectacular. When I take it in, or even take some of it in, it makes a very strong impression. And a part of the impression is, of course, that even when I take some of it in, there is still a knowledge that I could take more of it in. So that there is more which is existing in addition to this subjective experience. So then the sentence comes to the mind that the reason I care is because I know that I exist, and even exist within an infinitely magnificent space of life. And this is then, first of all, constated as a matter of fact, and also adopted as an attitude to life in general, which is seen from my present position within it all, myself being once again also changing within it all, and with the kind of change I'm involved in being a response to the question of the best way to live now and onward. So could our response to the path of living begin like this, from the acknowledgement of the reality of being part of a magnificent life process, that it makes sense to try to live as magnificently as I can. And this seems to be the point that I keep returning to. That this is what matters, and this is what's possible. And this is what I want to do. So since I'm in this kind of a position, it is clear that I will have to develop my own answer to the question of what is the right way to live. And if I want to create a super system, then that super system has to begin being a super system for my own life. It certainly has to include my own life, and then from that it can also be a super system that can have more general relevance and can inspire other people or influence the space of events around me in a good way. And this is where perhaps we may begin to come into a new kind of knowledge which is scalable, and where it turns out that certain principles for a good life for one person might be corresponding to a good life for other people, and where the big question is which principles correspond and overlap. So on this note, I will finish today's investigation of the super system, having said quite a few words about the general scenario within which this question is being asked, and what the purpose of the super system is. An assistance to the good life. And also mentioning that the super system is fundamentally multidimensional, so that there is one supersystem which consists of a multitude of other supersystems, which consist of a multitude of other supersystems within those again, and so on and so forth. So that the model for the supersystem has already from the beginning within it this mentioned complexity and magnitude, which is confusing and at the same time makes life more interesting. So this is the point from which this investigation begins. And then I will take a little break and continue later.